has to be regulated very, very, very carefully. Because in general, I mean, this is a topic that comes up in Hasidus a lot, that where there's a lot of energy, right? Being that we're living in a world where Klippa and Klippas Noiga are very dominant forces, they have a tendency to usurp, to latch on to high energy fields. They like that. They see high energy. When they see high energy, they say, "Oh, whoa! How can we tap into that?" So, low energy Avodas Hashem is low energy. That's all it is. It's just low energy. But at the same time, it's kind of safe. It's a lot safer. High energy, passion, for example, extreme passion, has to be very, very carefully regulated. And for that, we actually need a Moshe Rabbeinu to be our guide. So it is true that Pinchas managed to do this on his own somehow. But I guess Pinchas, he knew what he was doing, right? But for the common people, before we engage this kind of activity, as well-intentioned as it may be, and usually it is well-intentioned, but because of the conditions of the world that we live in, it's extremely important that it be that it be done under very careful guidance. This is just my footnote on what Rabbi Yosef was sharing with you. Okay, so I was thinking today to begin by discussing language, because what we find is that both cultures create different, languages. I don't mean just the basic language. I'm talking about certain terminologies, the way words are used, right? And Hasidus is obviously a culture, and Hasidism has its unique language, words that they use that are perhaps foreign, not familiar to someone for whom this culture of Hasidism is foreign, right? But even more so, I would say, is in the culture of Lubavitch, the culture of Chabad, okay? There's language that's used, and it could be traced directly back to the teachings of Hasidus, okay? Now, I want to focus on one word, right? And it's kind of like a simple word. The word is etzem. Etzem. Etzem in English translates to essence. Okay. But it's unfortunately, it happens to be that it's a somewhat misunderstood word. Okay. Because the truth is, anything that can truly be referred to as etzem or atzmi, right, means that it defies definition. The alternative to etzem is, in the terminology of Hasidus, it would be gilui. Gilui, literally, it's an abstract term that's used. It means revelation, but more specifically, it's application, manifestation, right? And that is the alternative to etzem. Anytime you begin to try to describe the etzem, right? When you try to describe the etzem, as soon as you begin, you're not talking about the etzem. You're talking about some element of the etzem that projects itself, that manifests. And now it's gilui, it's not etzem. Okay?
It's like with Hashem doesn't have any parts. And the moment you try to describe...
Right, the ultimate etzem, of course, interestingly, and this is something that's actually very unique to Hasidus Chabad. all Jewish people have a term that they use when they're talking about Hashem, right? Either it's just Hashem, that's the most common probably. People who speak Yiddish will call the Hashem the Eibishter, right? Or in some cultures, the Kutchabrichu. In other cultures, the Heilige Shechina. And many, many different terms, right, that are used when you want to say Hashem, right? Right? The Boire Olam, right? That's I think Romanians or maybe Hungarians, they're very common. The Heilige Bashefer, in Yiddish, the Heilige Bashefer, the Holy Creator, right? There are many, many different terms that are used when speaking about Hashem, right? In Chassidus, so in the actual Chassidus, right, the term that's used, the most common term that's used for Hashem is what? Etzem. Or a little bit more expressed a little bit more than just the word etzem, atzmusei umahusei. Atzmus umahus. When you learn Chassidus, right, and there's a reference to Hashem, it's atzmus umahus, right? Now, the reason, perhaps, is because in Chassidus, a lot of Chassidus is devoted into understanding Hashem's relationship with the world that He created, right? Our whole Avodas Hashem is based on the fact that we're living in a reality that He created, right? And that we're supposed to be serving Him within the context of that reality, right? So we're serving Hashem. So we have to have there's a relationship going on over here, right? So in the relationship in Chassidus, we focus on the different ways that we refer to Hashem as being different modes of the relationship, right? We focus on that. So we say that, for example, the Shem Yud Vav Kei is Hashem revealing Himself, right? The Shem Elokim is Hashem concealing Himself, and on and on. As a matter of fact, when we speak about the 10 Tiferes, right, there's a name for Hashem that corresponds to every one of the 10 Tiferes. Each of those names is speaking about Hashem, the way He's relating to us through one of those Tiferes.
It's interesting, right? As far as Elohim, there is it's a level that even Paro understood, right? Hashem having
exactly.
And yet at the same time,
for that reason, right?
Yeah.
So because Chassidus delves so much into analyzing our relationship with Hashem, which necessitates understanding how Hashem interacts with us, right? So there's a lot of focus of different ways that Hashem is presenting Himself, right? So therefore, there's this necessity to make that distinction between the manifestation of godliness, the way Hashem is presenting Himself, right? And the atzmos ubahos. In order that we do not make the mistake of beginning to visualize Hashem through the way He manifests Himself. Okay? Don't focus on that and say, oh, I know Hashem. He is the ultimate doer of kindness. I know Hashem. He is the ultimate mightier than all the other gods of the world, or whatever, right? Melech, Malchi, Hamlachim. He's the Melech, but he's Malchi, Hamlachim. These are all descriptions. And these are all real true descriptions. These are ways that Hashem chooses to expose, to show Himself, right? But we have to always remember, you can't focus in and hone in and say, okay, now I know Hashem, right? One of the psukim that are used in order as the foundation for Chassidus, especially Chassidus Chabad, is the pasuk in Navi, Da Elikei Avicha. Know you're the God of your forefathers. Okay, so know means that you have to have a direct, conscious, intellectual connection, right? The whole Da is only in the levels of Hashem that lend themselves to something that we, as human normal beings, with our Da, right, being able to relate to, right? We have to, of course, also understand that there's the level of Hashem that's unrelatable. We cannot relate. It's beyond. And for that reason, we have the term the Hatzvi-Bais. But Da Lekei Avicha doesn't make that distinction. So we have to both know and appreciate the different ways that Hashem interacts with us, but we also have to know and understand about that which we cannot know. The knowing that you can't know, which I find to be amazing feature of the human mind. The fact that there's a mind that knows is obviously a very interesting, intriguing thing. Okay, that's consciousness, right? And the consciousness is one of the things that are still baffling the scientists, right? So the reductionists are going to they claim, right, that that they will find how consciousness emerges from quantum states, right? That's what the reductionists are going to argue. But just recently, if you follow weird stuff, right, on your feed of weird news, right? So recently, just the big announcement, a 25-year wager between a philosopher and a quantum physicist, I think. I forget their names. So what was the wager? 25 years ago, they were at a conference and they made a public wager. And the public wager was, in 25 years, will they have discovered how consciousness emerges from quantum states? Okay, obviously that was the physicist, and the philosopher says, sorry, it's not going to happen. It might happen one day, but it's going to take a lot more than 25 years. So now is the 25th year anniversary, and he obviously the other guy loses the what's it called.
And even worse,
the bet was over a case of fine wine. So the physicist had to turn over a case of some fine Spanish wine, imported wine, to the philosopher.
And even worse for the scientists, that's like now, scientists from other fields have spotted evidence for the ghost behind the machine.
Yeah.
So in other words,
Yeah. Yeah.
And the telescope is also causing certain scientists.
Yeah, whatever. Okay, whatever. So I'm not what's it called. I am not a skeptic. I believe that science will discover amazing things as they have, right? And you know what? It'll be fine for me if they figure out how consciousness emerges from what's it called. I don't care. That doesn't bother me. There are certain principles that will still always remain true as far as I'm concerned. So I'm not scared about it. I'm not worried about it. I'm not worried that it's not shaking my face, right? Well, even if he wins the wager, it doesn't in any way. But the point is that besides the fact that consciousness itself is such a mysterious, elusive thing, right? We all have it. We all know that it's there, but nobody can quite figure out what it is or where it comes from, right? Whatever, as another one of these weird articles that come by that find its way into my telephone, right, is a book review of a psychologist, or somebody who literally is, wants to bring together the what's it called, I learned a new term. So there was this famous philosopher, Carl Jung, is the way it's yeah.
Well, he was
right.
A psychologist.
So Carl was a psychologist and a philosopher, but Carl Jung came up with this notion called synchronization or synchronamity. Right. Basically, it's a scientific study of what we call hashgacha. Okay. In other words, this is I didn't know this before. I'm surprised that it hasn't come up, in anything else that I have read up until now. But here you have how, from a scientific perspective, there is something more than just the basic elements of time and space and matter that fills that time and space. Okay. We think of time and space of each thing existing, maybe in its own independent place, and it interacts with others, right? But we don't think of one overall, right, causality, right, that binds them all together. So Now I'm telling you, it's amazing. Different articles coming from different, where the focus is on. I just this morning, this whole universe, right? We think of looking at the very small. That's what quantum physicists do, right? They look at the very small, right? That's really what the term reductionism comes from, where we reduce all of reality to its most basic particle, right? So if you look, you'll find the molecule. Then you find the molecule is made of atoms. Then you see the atoms is made of protons and neutrons and electrons. And then you look even more, and then you find that those are made of quarks. So they finally got down to the very basic elements of existence, right? Mm-hmm. Now, so there's this guy who wants to say that there are so many questions that come up that are unanswerable, and maybe we have to take a different approach, and we have to look at the whole universe as one big quantum system. Okay, so you read? Yeah, I guess you're like me. So, and I'm thinking, so these people are not claiming God, right? But they keep on saying things in the context of science that's so parallel. Well, Hashem, the things that we believe already for 3,000 years, right? That Avraham Avinu established, right? So here you have this thing called synchronity or something, sync whatever from Carl Jung, that which is basically that in addition to the basic, foundations, the background of reality, time, space, and substance, right? That fills the time and the space, that's operating in time and space. We have another force called synchro, whatever, I forget what the term is, right? Hashgacha pratis. And it's based on scientific research of how things happen that cannot be explained, right, by anything other than hashgacha pratis, right? It was a review about a book of a lady scientist, and they're talking about how brave she is to be able to break away from some of the absolute, the dogmas of science, right? And to begin look scientifically evidence for another force. She came to it because of things that were happening in her life that she could not explain, right? That we would just say, Hashgacha pratis, right? God is involved in your life, right? And these things are happening based on Hashgacha pratis. Things that scientifically, mathematically, the chances of them happening are so minute, right? That whatever. She had a friend that passed away, and then constantly it was almost as if this friend was still communicating with her, right? And she kept getting these signals. She couldn't figure out, how is it possible, right, that these things are happening? It cannot be random, because it's happening too many times that scientifically something that has such a low probability is scientifically considered zero. Okay, if you would ask a person, can I walk through that window, right? Scientifically, the answer will be no, but not because it's impossible. It's because the probability of every single particle lining up, right, so that you could actually walk through is so astronomically small that we call it scientifically a zero. Sure.
How can you explain the unexplainable?
So it's not so much about explaining the unexplainable; it's about knowing that that there's something unexplainable, recognizing there's something unexplainable, and that's what when I said da. So knowing is not just about understanding how Hashem interacts with us, where he presents himself in ways that we can relate to, right? Based on the principle also from Navi, as that Hashem just from your own self, right? What's the letter? From my own flesh, meaning from examining my own self, I can get insights into Hashem. You're only getting insights into the Hashem, where the Hashem himself calls himself a Adam, right? Because when he revealed himself to Yecheskel Hanavi, right? So Yecheskel Hanavi saw all these spiritual realities, but then he saw this Adam, like he said. It was this overall, what do they call it? The God, the overall element of this vision, right? Was this Adam, like he said. And it's called Adam. Why is it called Adam? Because that's Hashem who's revealing himself to Yechezkel Adavi in ways that we can relate to.
What's interesting is that's like, it should probably, because my great grandmother was a big of Tzedekahs, lots of weird, wonderful things that happened in my life. Right?
Well, okay, so Carl Jung would tell you that you're experiencing synchronimity or whatever.
It's wonderful. For scientific explanation.
Let's say again. What?
Her experiences that made her think that the scientists.
What was her experiences? It was like just things that seemed to be like happening. Like she was thinking about her friend, and then she's driving to work, and all of a sudden this song is playing on the radio about exactly what she was thinking about. Right now, if that happens once, you know what I mean. Okay, so,
Yeah.
but she said it just kept on happening over and over and over. I don't know exactly what they all were.
Her friend had passed away.
It was a friend of a colleague, I think, a professional colleague, also another scientist that had passed away, and she just couldn't avoid noticing that he was still communicating with her. Okay, so and then she attributes it to this Carl Jung's idea of how did Carl Jung come to that conclusion? I'm not sure. I just read about stuff, you know what I mean? I'm not a student of Jung, what's it called? Jung, whatever. But whatever, and I read things and I keep on seeing these parallels, and they're like they blow my mind. That's the fact.
That's like if you believe in Hashem, then if science is able to explain these things, it's wonderful. But if it's not, it's no big deal. But with them, it's a real problem. So like with me, I automatically think
Exactly. So I guess what I notice, I don't know if this is a new phenomenon, I'm sure it's not, but what I'm noticing is that there are more and more instances of scientists who are ready to just let go, right? Let go. I mean, again, another thing. I mean, yesterday was a good day or a bad day for spending too much time on my telephone, because that's how I make it through the fast. Right, and I'm listening to this guy. He's an astrophysicist, and he says, astrophysicists, like he didn't use these words. He didn't come across very strong. But basically, what he was saying is that scientists create for themselves dogmas, right? They create for themselves their own religion, right? So they come up with things that all of the data leads to it, but you can't actually see it. So they create a reality. He says that's the only place that it happens is in whatever, right?
Physics, yeah.
Astrophysics. He says because all other science could do actual, experiments, right? So you do repeat experiments and you come up with the same results. So then science says, okay, so that's enough for us to determine this to be a reality. You cannot do that in astrophysics, because you cannot try to see if, let's say, we'll make a sun and then we'll make a moon, or we'll see how it's going to, how it's going to orbit, and then we'll do it how many times, and no, all we can do is make observations. And based on the observations, we then say, well, how do we explain this and this? So there must be that and that. The great example of that is called dark matter. Okay, dark matter is such a prevalent thing in the universe, in physicism or whatever it's word, right? That they just say it has to be, but you can't see it, so that's why it's called dark matter, right? You can only see that there are certain effects that could be explained if there was such a thing as dark matter, right? And what his lecture was, maybe we have to take a whole new, fresh approach, right? And understand that maybe we're only seeing a very little part. He says, at the end of the day, this universe is so vast, it's so big, right? That it's ludicrous to think that from our little tiny window, we can know everything. Some people actually think that we reached now you have this new telescope or whatever. We've seen it all. We can see all the way back to the very beginning of creation. And he's kind of saying, he says, that's like ludicrous for somebody to even think. We're seeing amazing stuff. There's no question about it. But to say that, therefore, because it's so amazing, relative to what they were able to see 100 years ago, right? So therefore you reach the end case, and that would be ludicrous, right? And then there's all these unanswered questions. No matter how much you could see, it's creating even more questions and not answers.
He gave this new telescope.
They're not, yeah, exactly. It's creating new questions. Not really.
Yeah.
Anyway, so da Elekei Avicha is also the capacity to understand that our minds can intellectually conclude that there's something that we cannot understand. Okay, it's amazing. There are a lot of references in Chassidus, right? I remember years and years ago listening to a lecture in Hebrew by Sofer. What's his first name? Cheskel Sofer. So he was one of the first to be very involved on campuses in Israel, right? I think officially as the Chabad of Beersheba or something, whatever. Very smart guy, Cheskel Sofer. I'm around so long in Lubavitch that when Lubavitch wasn't so big, people knew each other, right? So I know Cheskel Sofer and Cheskel Sofer knows me. We never interact, but we know of each other's existence, right? We interacted, briefly, here and there, but not much. And I was listening to one of his lectures. I think I probably got it from Yankele Peled used to listen a lot to Cheskel Sofer, right? And he's speaking to these students, and he says, "What is I?" And he goes he's forcing them to think that at the end of the day, nobody can actually put their finger on the I, right? Yeah. Because the I is a certain essence. Once you trying to put your finger on it, you say, "Oh, that's you," and you say, "I am passionate about making the planet green. That defines me." This is really? He said, "Did you always feel that way?" Well, no. Oh, so that wasn't you, the one who didn't feel the way? That was someone else. It was a different I, right? This is still not the I, right? Again, this notion of an essence, right? And in Avodah, by the way, this comes up really, really in a very important way, because Avodah is very much dependent on being able to actually step out of yourself and look at yourself, to analyze yourself. Look at yourself, right? So, you have in Tanya where the Alter Rebbe says, look at yourself and talk to that self that you're seeing, right? And if it needs a little Musser, give it Musser, you know what I mean? Scream at it, Alter Rebbe even says. Alter Rebbe quotes at the Gemara, right? That person, you have to sometimes look at yourself and then get mad at yourself, right? So who's getting mad? Is mad getting mad at mad, or something else getting mad at something that deserves to be mad, right? So there is, and by the way, this Nekuda comes up a lot in psychology. It's called mindfulness, for example. And it's a very common method that's being used, right? Where people are taught to tap into a level of their own consciousness that transcends what they up until that moment thought was their basic consciousness, okay? Stepping out of your own consciousness. I mentioned them a number of times. There's a psychologist, who's actually a Jewish guy, Schwartz, who is the most successful in dealing with the most extreme OCD patients, which apparently are considered to be the most difficult disorder to treat. We're talking about extreme cases where it's destructive, where a person cannot function normally, right? Occupational, obsessive, compulsive, right? Disorder. Everybody's got a little bit of it, right? And I think it's important because otherwise, everything will be a hefker. You know what I mean? I know some people maybe don't have any of it, and that's why their room looks like a hurricane came through, right? Yeah, yeah, right. But so I think a little bit is important, right? But sometimes you have people for whom it's totally disruptive to their life. It's disruptive. That's called obsessive, right? So I guess by calling it obsessive means we recognize a little bit might be good. Having a little schnapsel here and there is good, but obsessive drinking is a problem. Likewise, obsessive, compulsive, the need for it. Right. So this guy, he was actually the one successful therapist, right? And what he does is he trains his patients to step out of their bodies, to step consciously, go out of yourself, right? And then look at yourself. And that's how you learn how to deal with your issue, right? And then it could be used not just in in this severe case. It could be used in people of anxiety and so on and so forth, right? But again, this is a very familiar thing to me because as a student of Hasidus, right, I know that there's the I, and that is the essence. Don't try to describe it, but it actually is what's providing you, although this is also going to be a manifestation of that I, but it's at least providing you with the capacity to be not the sum of your conscious experiences, but rather some element that transcends all of your experiences and your consciousness, so that you could actually look at them and you could actually evaluate them and assess them, and then and come up with an understanding of where things need to be fixed and changed. Right? I think it's very basic in a way.
Through hypnosis, or just
Hypnosis would be one way. I don't know if that's what this guy that I'm talking about, if that's what he would do. I don't know. I mean, again, I only read a little bit about a lot of things. I'm not going to delve in now and become the therapist for OCD patients, right? I'm just tapping into information that I find interesting. That's all I do. I'm not a quantum physicist. And I know very little about quantum physics, but I like to tap in for information that simply enhances my understanding of Chassidus at the end of the day, because I find parallels, right? And I say, wow, this is amazing. I mean, Chassidus does it. Chassidus uses one of the most fundamental physical phenomena here in this world, right, to understand the deepest things. The other term that's used for Hashem, other than Atzvus Umahos, is the Or Ein Sof. Again, one of the most common terms in what's it called. Now, there is a distinction between Atzvus and the Or Ein Sof. What is the Or Ein Sof? The Or Ein Sof is the light that's emanating from the Atzvus Umahos. So it's not the Eretz. So that's established. It's the Or Ein Sof. But what's interesting about Or in its purest form is the closest that you can get to the essence. Because and this is by a careful study of physical light, you realize that there are so many properties to that physical light that are perfect metaphors for how Hashem is the essence, and then Hashem presents himself first to the Or Ein Sof, which is completely 100% also undescribable, right, and pure, and then it's filtered through the Tiferes, which would be like passing light through a film, and that now gives the light character. Light has no character until it's passing through a prism or a film or whatever, right? The rainbow is inherent to the light, but it's invisible unless the light is filtered through some other, that's called the Elikim element, the Kalim, right? That filter that light. So yeah, Chassidus uses Or. There's a mimer from the Frierdiker Rebbe where the Frierdiker Rebbe speaks about 5 observable characteristics of physical life, of physical light, right? And this mimer is actually the premise of the mimer is to justify why we're even using a physical term when we talk about Hashem. Atzvus Umahos is a very abstract term, right? Essence, right? But the Or Ein Sof is a very whatever. That's a very physical metaphor, right? So the Alter Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, I mean, it's based also on my Maimonim from before, right? But the Frierdiker Rebbe literally lays out the case as to why this metaphor of all metaphors is the chosen metaphor, because when you examine physical light, you can point, and I think he brings 5 different things about the light that just observing physical life, you notice, and it becomes the preferred metaphor when we want to speak about Hashem in his initial stage of interacting with the world. And I say the initial stage, it's the Or Ein Sof, it's still undescribable, right? but it's the level where Hashem is already landing himself, right, to interacting with another reality. Then it goes through the whole process of being filtered through the 10 Tiferes of Atzilos, and then they come to the level of Bria until finally Hashem is revealing himself to us in the realities of this world, right? So when he does miracles for us in this world that we don't get to see openly, right? But we do know how to appreciate what Hashem is doing, and we're appreciating real things in our life, right? Okay. Sometimes it's tragedies, but that's really something that I should get to right now because it's on the mind of this week's Kutei Torah, right? But before, and even if we don't get to Kutei Torah, I want to just provide a support to what I started this shiur with, that we have our own linguists, what's it called? The own language, right? And we use this term of essence, etzem. It's all over Chassidus, etzem, right? I want to give one example. And I did this last Shabbos because I was having a conversation with someone, and I said, I'm going to show you that to you, the term etzem, being that you're living in the culture of Chabad, is a real term. And I'll show you how. So I shared something that happened some years ago when I ended up, I was in a home in Borough Park. My wife's great uncle had passed away. Okay. Now he has a family of only sons, right? I have 6 or 7 sons, and they are the Biyaner Chassidim of Borough Park. Okay. So I'm sure there are other Biyaner Chassidim, of course, right? I think it's the Biyaners.
I was by a Biyaner dinner in New Jersey where every plate
The
costs a
fisherman's?
minimum of 1,000.
Okay, but in any, I think it's Biyaner. I might be wrong. It might be different. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So so we went to the great aunt, right? And my wife knew her because her mother spoke about her a lot. Her mother remembers when they left Yerushalayim, right? And it's a sister to her grandmother, who she knew well, lived in Meir Sharim, right? And this sister actually lived right next door or something, right? So we went to be Menachem. So 2 of the sons were there. This was sometime after Gimel Tammuz. I don't know how much after Gimel Tammuz. And they asked me, it says, how come in Lubavitch they didn't appoint another Rebbe? This was the question they asked. As a Lubavitcher Chassid, I look at him and I say, are you crazy? You apparently don't know what a Rebbe is. This is what do you mean? A Rebbe is a mensch, Rebbe is also a person. So I say, you don't appoint a Rebbe. Either you're a Rebbe, you're not a Rebbe. Okay? If there's no Rebbe, that means there's no Rebbe. You can't make a Rebbe. I think this would be a natural response to most Lubavitcher Chassidim. You can make a Rebbe. The Rebbe is a Rebbe. What does that mean? That means that we innately, just by growing up in this, in this environment where Chassidus Chabad actually affected how we think, right? And this notion that, what do you mean? You don't make a Rebbe is so obvious and clear to us and other Chassidim who have Rebbes. But the etzem, what do you mean? Your Rebbe is a CEO, your Rebbe is a great leader, he's a spiritual influencer, he's everything. Spiritual influencer. Maybe it won't be as good, maybe it might be better in some other things, or this and that, right? But it's not the essence. I said, yeah, if you want to look for one of those, we could probably find somebody. But we know Rebbe, right? Rebbe cannot be replaced. It's essence. Either it is or isn't. Cannot be replaced. And my point in using this example is that, at least for me, I look at these people and that's the end of the conversation. There's nowhere to go with the conversation because we, Baruch Hashem, understand something that they apparently don't they don't relate to it. They don't relate to that idea. And it's not.
Wasn't the Rebbe replaced 7 or 6 other times?
Yeah, because each time there was a Rebbe. But after the seventh, there just wasn't a Rebbe, right? So now we just have that Rebbe. That's all. So we're sticking with that Rebbe because the essence of Rebbe is in that Rebbe. Baruch Hashem, we could still have a connection, right? 3 weeks exactly from this Shabbos will the Mitzvah Hashem be going to the Rebbe, right? And I tell people it's going to be a very inspiring Shabbos. But we could have an inspiring Shabbos maybe by renting somewhere out here in what's it called in the country, right? And get together. We've done that years ago. We had guys Shabbos, right? Until the wives found out how much we were drinking over the weekend. But it was great. It was a wonderful. Everybody loved it. It was very inspiring, right? So I said, yeah, we'll have an inspiring Shabbos, but ultimately that's not where we're going. We're going because we have to remember that we're still connected to the essence. When I say connected to the essence, I mean connected to the very essence of your being, right? And the way of being connected with the essence of your being is to being connected to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, we know this from the last Maimon that the Rebbe left us, V'yata Titzave. He is the conduit to our own essence, right? So Lamashal, Mesiras Nefesh, which is something that we do that's coming from the essence, right? Or as close to the essence as you can imagine. Again, when you talk about the essence, you got to be careful. So even Mesiras Nefesh, Rebbe makes the point that ultimately that's not the essence, right? And that's why Mesiras Nefesh, unfortunately, functions in specific circumstances better than in others. If it's the essence, so it's ultimately not the essence. Pretty close to the essence. It was used as the example of the essence for a long time, but understanding that at some point it also has its limits, right? Because if it's truly the essence, it should not be confined to certain circumstances. The Rebbe makes that point in the Yato Tetzaveh. He says in Russia, people have Mesiras Nefesh, right, for their Yiddishkeit. Why? Because in the essence. And when the greatest proof that it's coming from the essence is that there was no way to predetermine who's going to have that Mesiras Nefesh. It didn't, if a guy was a big chassid, a big tzaddik, and whatever, right? Was no greater indicator that he'd be more likely to have Mesiras Nefesh than the guy who, unfortunately, is not even able to keep Shabbos because of his job. But when it comes to a certain thing, he says, "That's it. I'm a Ayid, and that's it." Right? In other words, Ayid often, when you start chepping with the Yiddish, when you chep it by Shabbos, you might have some success. The goy might have some success, but you're going to chep it. You're going to try to interfere with my very connection to being Jewish. Oh no, das nicht, that not right. And for that, there's no prerequisite. Ayid is Ayid because he's in essence, he's Ayid. So that is a good indicator. That would be an example of the essence coming through. But ultimately, says the Rebbe, it's not the ultimate essence because it seems to usually work in difficult atmospheres. In comfortable atmospheres, that same person, all of a sudden, you see that he's slacking up. How do you slacken up? Where's the soul? Where's the essence? The essence wants to be a Yid as much in America as it wanted to be a Yid in Russia, right? Again, essence, the word essence, it just keeps on coming up over and over and over. And Ashreinu Matei Cholkeinu, how fortunate we are that we are steeped in the culture of Chabad, which begins with the teachings of Chabad Chassidus. And the more you learn Chabad Chassidus, the more your mind gets comfortable with this notion. As a young student, by the way, 16, 17, 18, I struggled with it. I almost came to the conclusion that I'll never understand Chassidus. And somehow it kind of fell into place. It clicked. But I was very frustrated for a while, and I saw other people who they actually my same age, right? People, contemporaries who were like really, really good masters of understanding Chassidus and Maimarim, and I felt that there was a certain block, and I couldn't get over it, right? But Baruch Hashem, because keep at it, and then your mind somehow just shifts. It makes a shift. It's by the way. It's there's certain, like in Lahavdil, in mathematics, there's a certain point in a person's life where if you try to teach them the same thing, even though they're very bright, 7th grade, 8th grade, it's just not going to click. It takes a certain maturity, which, by the way, is the capacity to think in the abstract. Being able to think abstract develops. In other words, you can be very intelligent, but the capacity to think in the abstract is something that you have to grow into. And different people grow into it at different times. So for some people, calculus, 11th grade is wonderful. For some people, it's way too early, right? And some people will do it in 8th grade, right? That's, by the way, when I quit math. I did algebra and I did geometry. That was fine. But then when it came to calculus, I said, no, this is taking way too much of my brain power. I'd rather be using it for learning. I called my parents, that's it. I'm not going to secular studies anymore. I'm devoting myself just to learning. Okay. So I started a week of calculus and I said, no. This is way too much brain energy. I'm not. Geometry was a breeze. I didn't have to exert any effort, or algebra also was pretty much a breeze. But then I met my challenge. When I met my challenge, I said, that's it. Like cosines and all that stuff. Oh, whatever. I'll rather focus on the Ketzeis Shulchan. But in any case, going to the Oyel is again something that Chassidim do. Why? Because they understand. We all want to stay connected to the essence. We don't understand exactly what it is. We're not so sure about, but we do want to stay connected. And that's it. It'll be a very inspiring Shabbos. But the bottom line is that we're going because that's the place where we get in touch with our essence. Yeah, we can get in touch with it otherwise, but it was designed for that purpose. It was designed to be in touch with your essence. Anyway, so good Shabbos. I put in my little plug, my little advertisement. This is I would just